So I just want to show you what the kind of stuff is happening right now, the kind of crazy stuff that people are saying. So we have, of course, Bill Maher, pretend lefty, millionaire, who actually is a water carrier for the establishment. Uh, this is another. Remember, he said Amy Klobuchar. He's taking a hard look at her, right?
Yes.
That's because he's on Viagra. But he says as today should be the start of baseball. And I always admire a guy who knows how to abbreviate the word "should." I wouldn't know where wouldn't know where does it even start, but he did it. SHLD takes out all the vowels. Is that how you abbreviate stuff? You just take the vowels out. As today should be the start of baseball, let me offer an analogy: let's take out a tired starter who's been wobbly through 4 and is going to get shelled in the later innings. Let's go to the bullpen and bring in a real ace. Biden should step aside and let New York Governor Andrew Cuomo be the nominee. There's either one of two things going on here. The only way you could think like that is if you've been paid millions of dollars by the establishment to think like that, or by the machine to think like that, or you're actually suffering from dementia yourself. Maybe a little touch of both. Is there now it's like Bill Maher is just like you just go to him for joke takes. Like he's never said anything and people are like passing around because it's smart. Although that did get 14,900 likes, so I'm sure he thinks people think it's smart. So there are people who think it's smart. People who think it's smart are the same people who think we have to fight him over there before we fight him over here. Smart. That's the kind of smart that is. Oh, that people who think that's smart are the people who think we can't afford health care. How are you going to pay for it? Oh, friend of the show, Michael Tracy. Pretty sure I'd rather have Andrew Cuomo in charge right now than the lady from Sex and the City. No, I'd much rather have the lady from Sex and the City. Because the lady from Sex and the City wouldn't cut Medicaid right now in the middle of this pandemic, probably, because that's what Andrew Cuomo's doing. So, but I get it.
I think he's just trying to be funny.
Michael Street. I know, but there's got to be a ring of truth for it to be super funny. But man, Michael Tracy, like every other one of his tweets, I'm texting it back to him like, come on.
Really? Is that what you do?
You know, he always has, everything he says is logical. But there's always, Ruby just texted me. Cynthia Nixon. Yes, I know Cynthia. Yes, thank you, Ruby. Cynthia Nixon. Yes, I should have said it. Cynthia Nixon is the lady from Sex and the City. Look at this. Ryan Grimm tweeted this out. Just remembered something from my book. In 1988, the Democratic establishment crafted a backup convention plan if Dukakis couldn't stop Jesse Jackson. They were going to give the nomination to Mario Cuomo, Andrew's dad, at a brokered convention. Come on! But that's pretty heavy duty. And I think maybe I tweeted that out, and I said the Democratic Party is not an opposition party to Trump and Republicans. They have a very symbiotic relationship with them because they work for the same billionaires. The Democratic Party is in firm opposition to workers, not the oligarchs, not the Republicans, not Trump, but to workers. So not so funny, and I'm not really sure if I use symbiotic correctly, but
Jimmy, I think it's funny.
It's not an adversarial relationship. So this is what's happening. The reason why I bring all this up is this is what's happening now. The New York Times is running stories like this. How Cuomo, once on sidelines, became the politician of the moment.
Jeez.
With his coronavirus briefings, Governor Andrew Cuomo has emerged as an authoritative voice in the crisis. So this is what's happening. That's why Bill Maher tweeted that out. Because if you want to know what conventional wisdom is, go to Bill Maher's Twitter feed. He's emerging as the party's most prominent voice in a time of crisis. This is in the New York Times. His briefings, articulate, consistent, and often tinged with empathy, have become must-see television. On Tuesday, his address was carried live on all 4 networks in New York and a raft of cable news stations, including CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News. In a world where a virus should expose the poor way you've been governing, the news networks then don't tell the real story. In a sign of the way Mario Cuomo, I really want to say Mario.
I know.
In a sign of the way Mr. Cuomo has become the face of the Democratic Party in this moment, his address even preempted an appearance by former Vice President Joseph Biden on ABC's The View in New York. Wow, that is heavy duty. He's really popular now. So this is from I'm going to mispronounce. I never know how to pronounce. Is it
Just say
Jacobin? Jacobin?
Just say Jacobin. Who cares?
I'll just say it. Even in a pandemic, Andrew Cuomo is not your friend. This is by Akash Mehta. It's a great. So this is like when this is where I would disagree with Matt Stoller a little bit from yesterday when he said the people on the left don't know what the hell is going on. Though this person does who wrote this. The man who summarily disbanded the Corruption Commission, that's Andrew Cuomo. That's who he is. Do you want to know who he really is? He's the man who summarily disbanded the Corruption Commission he ran on creating when it began to investigate his allies. That's who Andrew Cuomo is. The Corruption Commission he ran on creating when it started investigating his buddies, he disbanded it. The man who made a host of videotape, that's like Trumpian, right? That's the kind of things people would say that Trump would do, and he's breaking all the norms. The man who made a host of videotaped promises in exchange for the Working Family Party's endorsements, only to turn around and break them all. That's who Andrew Cuomo is. The man who secretly worked for years to ensure Republican control of the state Senate. Read that again. The man who secretly worked for years to ensure Republican control of the state Senate, protecting himself from the flack that would come with having to veto progressive legislation. So instead of him having to veto progressive legislation, the way Andrew Cuomo killed it was he got the Republicans to get control of the state Senate. There was a bunch of Democrats who called themselves, what they call them, independent Democrats or some. Anyway, they were the ones that would vote with the Republicans, and they had Andrew Cuomo's cover. They were anything but independent. They were corporatist Republicans in Democrat clothing. So that's how that happened. So he didn't have to take the rap. Unless you thought he had turned a new leaf, Governor 1%, that's what they call him, is insisting on taking an axe to the state Medicaid budget, even at the cost of $6.7 billion in emergency federal aid, and is lying about it. In the most unequal state in the nation, he is fighting to protect the rich and impose austerity on everyone else. That's who Andrew Cuomo is. Bill Maher, I know you don't know that. I know you're too lazy and uninterested to find out who Andrew Cuomo is, and you make most of your political decisions the same way rednecks watching Jerry Springer make their political decisions on your emotion and from what you're seeing in the mainstream news media. So now you're starting to get a picture of who Andrew Cuomo is, Bill Maher. Maybe invite somebody on your panel that knows who Andrew Cuomo is. Oh, come on. Make no mistake, even in a pandemic, Andrew Cuomo is not your friend. When asked how average New Yorkers can be expected to make rent amid coronavirus's economic devastation, Cuomo claims he took care of the rent issue, but he ignores rent cancellation legislation that is currently supported by dozens of legislators. He uses the pandemic as cover to roll back last year's bail reform laws, the bail reform laws that have reduced the state's prison population by thousands. He not only uses $2 an hour prison labor to rebottle hand sanitizer, but also refuses to release elderly and sick inmates from filthy crowded jails like Rikers Island. And perhaps most scandalously of all, he continues to push to meet a budget shortfall by enacting deep Medicaid cuts rather than passing the wildly popular tax increases on the 0.01%, even though this would require him to turn down billions in federal coronavirus aid to the state. So do you understand what's happening? The state is going to they're offering New York $6.7 billion in Medicaid help, but for coronavirus, but the contingency is you can't cut Medicaid. He's going to turn that down so he can still cut Medicaid. That's what that means. Okay, moving on. Last week, even as New York became a global epicenter of the pandemic, Cuomo's Medicaid redesign team, or the MRT, released its proposal to cut, are you ready for this? $2.5 billion from the state Medicaid budget, including $400 million to hospitals as they battle coronavirus in the next year. Bill Maher, I know you don't know this. I'm a jagoff comedian in my garage. I do, so I'm going to tell you. Last week, even as New York became a global epicenter of the pandemic, Cuomo's Medicaid redesign team released its proposals to cut $2.5 billion from the state Medicaid budget, including $400 million cut to hospitals as they battle the coronavirus. That's the guy that Bill Maher says should be president right now, because he saw him act like a tough guy on TV, and he's just like all the fucking moron blue-collar people who voted for Ronald Reagan because he acted the part. And that's the political insight you get from Bill Maher at HBO. I like Andrew Cuomo. Why? Because he fits the suit. He looks nice.
Well, Jimmy, when I'm seeing that these cuts, this is awful. This is horrifying.
Yeah, this is what he's
This is horrifying.
This is the guy, though.
You're in my
Was I in your camera?
completely. I got one camera. That's where you were.
Oh, that's because the other camera's not working?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Cuomo justifies the cuts as reining in out-of-control Medicaid spending. Out of control. Oh, my God, the out-of-control Medicaid spending in the middle of spending $5 trillion on corporations and $1 trillion a day on Wall Street.
It's almost like Cuomo's a gangster.
It's almost like
Hey,
he's a
you know
gangster.
what? I'm going to make all these
Oh.
cuts, and then, I'm going to say, oh, shit, we need shit. Aren't I strong?
Line I strong standing up to Trump.
And
This is
that's
what
a
he's-
bad impression of gangsters. Okay.
This is what he's doing right now. And they're not really reporting it. Cuomo justifies the cuts as reining in out-of-control Medicaid spending. But as Roosevelt Institute fellows J.W. Mason and Naomi Zweed note, Medicaid spending is already under control. It's been rising at the same rate as New York's economy as a whole. Decades of cuts to New York's healthcare services, many of them championed by Cuomo, have contributed to the present crisis. I'll read that again. Decades of cuts to New York's healthcare services, many of them championed by Cuomo, have contributed to the present crisis. Now, As Cuomo calls for retired health professionals to re-enlist and orders hospitals to expand capacity by at least 50%, that understaffing and the state's elimination of 20,000 hospital beds. Read that again. The state's elimination of 20,000 hospital beds,
Jesus Christ,
which Cuomo has likely been the single most important person in bringing about, according to Sean Petty of the New York State Nurses Association, are major limits on New York's response to the pandemic. As Gottfried put it, the cuts have meant that at times like this, and even in normal times, we don't have the resources we need to keep people alive in New York City. A coalition of advocacy groups and unions have rallied around the hashtag Make Billionaires Pay agenda of 14 different measures to tax wealthy New Yorkers, including taxes on billionaires' wealth, stock buyback, stock transfers, yachts, and private jets, reversing Cuomo's tax breaks on the last item. Passing just one or two of those measures could immediately close the budget gap. The whole package, which has significant support in the legislature, would provide upwards of $30 billion in new revenue. And the measures poll extremely well, garnering the approval of over 90% of New York voters, including 87% of Republicans and 91% of suburban and upstate voters. He still won't do it. He'd still rather cut money from their hospitals in New York and from the poor. Take a minute to appreciate just how cruel the course is that Cuomo is taking. It would mean ramming through $2.5 billion in cuts to the healthcare system that millions of the hardest hit New Yorkers are relying on to get them through the world's worst healthcare crisis in a century, while simultaneously depriving the same system of nearly $7 billion in federal aid. So he's cutting $2.5 billion and turning down $7 billion. That's $9.5 billion. Andrew Cuomo is standing in the way of New York's health care.
Oh, yeah, he should be president.
That's the guy Bill Maher says should be president, and the New York Times. Of course. If you ever want to know what the wrong position is as a progressive, go look at Bill Maher's Twitter feed. Even if he ultimately caves to pressure from advocates and legislators to postpone the Medicaid cuts and take the federal money, the fact that he was prepared to go this route and that he'll likely make deep cuts to education spending regardless should open the eyes of even his most smitten admirers. So now you know the rest of the story. Steph, did you know that stuff about Andrew? I didn't know all that stuff about. I knew some of it. I didn't know all that stuff. Is that surprising to you that Andrew Cuomo, the person who AOC said she hoped got reelected, is doing all that horrible stuff?
You know, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Are you surprised? We were talking today how many cuts he's made in New York. I mean, that is what is the most overwhelming element of all of this are all the cuts that they have made to safety nets to help fellow Americans. And then somehow he's celebrated as the new president of choice for a Democratic nominee. It's gross, Jimmy. It's gross. And so what are we supposed to do?
I don't know.
Everybody keeps showing him on television. He's having all these press conferences. He's talking, we need this and we need to do that.
When is someone
Where were you 5 fucking months ago preparing for this?
Well, why? When is a reporter going to ask him about these Medicaid cuts at one of these press conferences? that he's willing to forego about $9 billion because he doesn't want to tax the wealthiest 0.1% of the people in his state. Wow. Wow.
You know, Jimmy, and this is the same culture that has been fully indoctrinated with the propaganda that we want handouts.
I know.
That we want
I know,
something
that we
for free.
Right.
You have been fully indoctrinated to think that, whoa, we want health care. We want something to free. Okay. You don't want to invest in your people who make the economy go. You don't want a healthy nation. You want us desperate and easily manipulated and controlled because that's what this happened. That's what is the cause and effect of all of this.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?